Coogs house. If you were paying attention on social media this weekend, it looks like there might have been a major shift in the Milos Uzan situation heading towards the Houston Cougars. Let's get into it on Locked On Cougs.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. Whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. But you make your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. You enjoy the conversation, but you don't know what to say. Tell us in the comments down below what your favorite game in Vegas is. You're a roulette person, a craps person, a blackjack person. Tell us in the comments, because we're talking about Las Vegas' own Milos Uzan in the first segment. Today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. We got more on them later. Like I said, we're going to talk about Milos Uzan in the first segment. Got to give the latest as of recording on him. I do want to talk about what Greg Sankey said about the Big 12, and that's the second segment. I do want to talk about some big-time 2026 basketball crews that had a big weekend. That'll be the third and final segment. But first, foremost, Houston's Milos Uzan has been in the NBA draft process. He has until the 28th, that's this Wednesday, to decide. And it felt like on Friday, things were leaning towards the NBA. The weekend seemed to have some sort of a major shift. And it feels like things are coming back towards Houston. As of the recording of this video, there's officially nothing out yet. However, we're working to get something out if and when the latest drops and be prepared for all situations at that point. The latest series of things happened kind of in sequential order over the weekend. So I want to give you kind of the tips, the tricks, that what seemed to be setting this off as kind of like red flags and things like that over the weekend for people that believe things have changed. First, I should point out that the thing that has changed, I guess, is in large parts some things that haven't happened. It felt like part of the reason Milos Uzan was waiting until the final declaration here was that if he's being projected in that early 40 range of the NBA draft, he'd be waiting to see if people ahead of him may be dropped out. And that would kind of move him up the order, specifically other guards, right? So you kind of wait to see, well, do those guards in the 30 to 35 range drop out or something like that, right? And you can get in the game that way. That has not happened. So the first thing would be things that haven't happened. That's something that hasn't happened. Earlier in the weekend as well, Milos Uzan and Tipton Edits, which is like the group that puts out different like graphics for coming backs or committings or transferring or whatever, they somewhat randomly followed each other over the weekend. Now, on its own, in an isolated incident, that could obviously be Milos Uzan following them and then going back following one another for an announcement. They staying in the draft, I guess, theoretically, right? But it seems kind of weird that with no other draft movement, that is what happened there, right? The next biggest thing, I guess, should say, I don't know, second, third, whatever order at the point we're in here, Landon Gosling, who's in charge of one of the people in charge of Houston's NIL program, tweeted out some various smiley faces with money signs and stuff like that, right? Now, this was the biggest red flag for people as far as like red Cougar flag, that he is coming back to Houston, right, for a lot of people over the weekend, kind of taking and running with. It led to, frankly, a lot of DMing between myself and others about what's going on here, what's the latest you're hearing, what's the latest I'm hearing, blah, 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 and all of that kind of stuff. A lot of people doing a lot of commentating. It led to, honestly, you saw GoCoogs.com put out a picture of Milos Uzan from Mario Puente, kind of randomly, led to some like different, we'll say like social media handles, like the different ones that are just for Houston Cougar latest and greatest and memes and whatever, all kind of putting out their best educated guesses as to that's what it is. I also think that it's probably no coincidence that PJ Haggerty, who was in the transfer portal as kind of the top guard still available, he left Memphis. He reportedly wanted like $4 million or something like that for Memphis. He was not going to get $4 million. He was in the NBA draft thing for a hot second, pulled that out, bounced around. He formally committed to Kansas State over the weekend in the transfer portal. No official numbers there, but it does look like he's hitting around the 1.5-ish million mark, which nobody is less than 4. But I don't think it's a magical coincidence that the best guard in the portal chooses Kansas State over the weekend instead of a school in his home state of Texas, and instead for about the same amount of money they can estimate, I think fairly safely, that people think Milos Uzan will bring in the NIL marketplace. Now, look, I get that there's a lot of talk on like different social media services. Discord had a whole back and forth on different Discord servers about that, he was never going to come back, and Kingston Fleming decided he was going to come to Houston because he was going to start. Milos Uzan is supposed to be going somewhere else, and I'm telling you right now, that's not true. But that's not what's happening, right? And so there's all kinds of talk on Facebook about like, what's the big deal? What's going on? Why do you ever in the first place? All kinds of talk on Instagram comments about when's it coming. All that. People are all over different social media services, whichever your cup of tea is, going about this. It is undoubtedly going to happen soon. It does feel like over the weekend that we're getting somewhat a confirmation of sorts that he did not get those guarantees he was looking for. Remember last, 10 days ago, Paper City Magazine, Chris Baldwin got the report that from Mike Uzan, his Milos' father, that they were waiting to see if they got an official report or official guarantee from teams, plural, that he would be drafted. You typically wouldn't take just one guarantee because things happen, right? But you've got a few of those, you'd feel comfortable even with an early second round or mid-second round draft grade that they will take you and give you a contract. Full disclosure, that's what is widely believed happened to Jamal Shead a year ago. He understood that he had teams that would not let him fall past them in the second round. One of those rumored to have been, through Discord servers and stuff like that, Toronto Raptors. Oh, magic. He ended up being on the Toronto Raptors, had a great rookie season. It's also, for its worth, frankly, why it's not so coincidental that Jamal Shead had a contract very shortly after being drafted. That's really uncommon for a second-round pick, especially a mid-second-round pick, with 23 years, 22 years old, that much tread on the tires and that kind of stuff too, right? Now, I do think that it feels like things shifted over the weekend. And on Friday, I feel like, Milos is kind of waiting for some of these teams he's working out for to give him that guarantee. I'd imagine, if I'm looking at this more as an analyst, putting that hat on, Milos Uzan is frankly getting told by a lot of teams like, hey, we love what you did at Houston. That's a very pro-style offense, a very pro-style role. You got to do it more than a year. We got to see the consistency year over year of this, right? The 42.8%, the three-point percentage can't just be a one-year thing, right? The way that you played off ball, on ball, that defense, that all can't just be a one-year thing, right? And so I think what you're seeing is that kind of feedback more so than the guarantees they thought. Because Milos' game, whether you liked it or not, I obviously thought it grew on a lot of fans over the course of the year. Milos' game is an NBA caliber game. He is NBA sized. He will get a shot. The question is just when. And I think the answer we're getting now is that it will not likely be this year. It does look like things are trending back towards Houston. That is a big shift from where we were just a few nights ago on Thursday night. Obviously, heading into the Memorial Day weekend, long weekend, things can change and shift. But wow, oh wow, Houston with Milos Uzan back would be so good. So deep, so talented. Best in the Big 12 for sure. And so speaking of the Big 12, Greg Sankey, SEC Commissioner, had some things to say when asked about seeding, straight seeding, and the good of the game. So I want to talk about his comments, somewhat of what they had to do with the Big 12 in a second. But before we get too far along here, today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. If you ever check your bank account, you wonder, where all that money go? Did it go to Lincoln Coogs? Did you put a bunch of money in to try to make sure you got Milos Uzan back? Thank you for that. But whether it's dining out, online shopping, entertaining yourself, it's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, full visibility control over your finances. But it's not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. Track all your accounts, investments, spending all in one place. You can stop managing money and start building wealth. Again, I'm a teacher, a coach, podcast, wife's got multiple incomes. We got a bunch of things going on at once. It's all in one singular place. I love the single dashboard. The app's all right there in front of you at the palm of your hand. Take control of your finances and Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. It's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for 50% off your first full year. Parker Rangers Locked on Coogs here. And there's also been some college football playoff news over the last few days. We touched on it briefly last week, but the decision being made will impact the Houston Cougars, but the College Football Playoff Committee is looking to shift the way they seed things. Regardless if they go from 12 to 16 teams, that's also being figured out. But it feels like a very big consensus is to move from a seeding that give preferential treatment to conference champions to a straight seeding. So in last year's college football playoff, you would not have had Boise State or Arizona State with buys into the second round. They would not have been seeded in the top four because they were not in the top four seeds, but they did win their conference, right? The way it was before was the top four conference champions all got a bye into. They got seeded as if they were 1, 2, 3, 4, even if they're not actually seeded 1, 2, 3, 4. And that gave a lot of importance to winning your conference, right? It gave a lot of importance to winning your conference championship game specifically. And it looks like that's going away. And that's frankly in large part because they don't like the idea, they being big dollar TV folks, don't like the idea of making the, big brands that are in the same conference potentially have to play multiple games. Anything can happen in a single game, right? And so what you're going to see, it seems like at least as far as change to college football playoff, is a straight seeding, meaning 1, 2, 3, 4, regardless of conference, will get a bye, and then 5 through 12, or if they end up doing a whole different kind of situation and get to 16 or whatever, right, we'll have to play it out. We talked last week, but I do think this is bad for Houston and the Big 12 on the whole. Last year, we saw Arizona State get that bye that they would not have got under the present system, under the present movement, I should say. Arizona State then took that bye and played Texas tooth and nail into overtime, right? Cam Scadabo, Sam Levitt, all that fun stuff, right? That is not crazy. We saw Houston play Texas tooth and nail in their only year in the Big 12 to overlap, right? Texas would go on to play in the Big 12 conference that year, right? Arizona State took them tooth and nail. Texas was in overtime, the SEC title game, and then played Arizona State to overtime of the, I believe it's Fiesta Bowl. Anyway, the first and second round, the second round of the college football playoff, right? And I'm here to say that it feels fairly simple. And I know football is not transitive property. It does not apply like that at all, right? But if Arizona State pushed Texas to that limit, right, that the Texas team that barely lost the SEC championship game, that Arizona State would have done something similar in the right situation with the team that won that championship game, which is Georgia last year, right? I think the big thing people are holding on to here is that the 4 teams that got buys did not win their games in the college football playoff in the first year of this bracket, I should point out. And so therefore they didn't deserve to get that bye. That's what people are going with here, right? And last week it came out that the Big 12 was not afforded this, the ACC was not afforded this. And Greg Sankey was asked by a reporter in his media availability over the weekend about, for the good of the game, does he, work with the other conferences or something to that effect? And basically about what do you think with the fact that these conferences have problems with this? They argue that it's not for the good of the game. Do you think you have any obligation for the good of the game? And Sankey went on and on basically saying, no, he doesn't think about the good of the game because the SEC does the whole hypothetical games anyway. He didn't say that part. That's me ad-libbing. But he said, Greg Sankey did say that he didn't need lectures from others about the good of the game, coordinated press releases about good of the game. He went on to say, I'm actually looking for ideas, not just complaints. And so I think what's interesting here is that Chris Williams, who is the Big 12 Vice President of Communications, quickly retweeted that quote from Pete Thamel and said that the Big 12 had not put out a press release on straight seeding, let alone a coordinated one with the ACC. And I feel like this is very emblematic of the SEC just kind of lumping everyone else together, not thinking about anyone but themselves. I think the most fascinating thing about this, though, is that the SEC acts like, right, they're this high and mighty, bigger, better, etc., but ultimately is finding ways to have to play less games and compete less, right? Whereas if we saw Big 12 push Texas to that limit last year, who's to say that, BYU, after the smackdown they put on Colorado in their bowl game, couldn't have done the same in a first-round matchup with a Clemson or with an Indiana or with, I don't know, who was third in the SEC last year, Ole Miss, whoever, right? Like those kinds of things are all still hypothetical. And the SEC is going to always argue they're hypotheticals. And, we did a fun job in the Big 12 squad, I feel like, of talking through how those are always ludicrous. But Sankey here is striking an argument here with Big 12 and ACC kind of conferences, arguing that they're already doing things that are better for the good of the game. But clearly, what the good of the game is, as far as the sport goes, is actually playing these things out, right? Everyone talks a lot about TCU as a Big 12 representative having a crazy blowout in the college football playoff championship game. But what they don't point out very often is that TCU destroyed it's been discovered now since cheating Michigan team in the first round of the college football playoff. They did that. And that TCU team didn't even win the Big 12 conference championship game. Right? And so under last year's model, that TCU team wouldn't have gotten to go to the college football playoff because they undoubtedly would not have been as high because they don't care about the Big 12 or whatever. And the college football champion would have been, the Big 12 champion would have been Kansas State. They'd have gone. The thing that's crazy to me is that unless the argument is that that TCU team would have made it in, right? I don't know. And Houston's building towards this, right? Kind of Wegman, Keyshawn Henderson coming down the line. Like Houston's going to be competing for this conference in the near future. And we continue to outline it here on the show. But this is not so far down the line. These things don't matter, right? But if you win the regular season in the Big 12, what incentive do you to have your starting quarterback play in the Big 12 championship game? You've already won the conference. You won the Big 12 regular season. Why would you put your guys out there if it's not going to get you a bye in the college football playoff? If it's not going to get you a better seeding in the college football playoff? Because you can just not play your guys, take the L, you're all good. You won the regular season, so you can't say you threw away the Big 12. You won the regular season. I would argue that's harder to do anyway. And I don't know. I think that game becomes a de facto playoff level wear and tear game without any playoff level implications or without any playoff level value. And so what you're doing by taking away the value of it, being it gets you a potential buy in the CFP, is you're incentivizing not playing your dudes in it. And we've seen in college football time and time again, especially when these salaries are not that of NFL athletes, right? Because it's just not the same kind of guarantees and contract language. Right? It's not crazy that an athlete would just not play in those games. We've seen big-time athletes get bowl games for less, right? And so, I don't know. I think that Sankey can talk this big, good of the game thing and make up more hypothetical arguments because he's all about hypotheticals. That's what the SEC is. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me to take away the value of winning your conference, especially when we've seen conference champions or even conference runner-ups like TCU do very well in the college football playoff and give them the chance. That's just from the Big 12. We're not even talking about ACC had number one overall draft pick or the NFL draft. Or that's their problem. We talk about that in a different show. But as far as Houston, the Cougs, Big 12 goes, they've shown time and time again that they can compete when given the chance. They just got to give them the chance. And I think that this is potentially taking away some of those chances. As more unfolds on that, I'm sure we'll talk about more in the Big 12 squad later this week because it's a very Big 12-centric issue. A very Houston-centric issue was the Nike EYBL Session 3 over the weekend. Some big-time recruits putting up big-time numbers. Let's talk about that in 1 second. But first, Park Rangers locked on Coogs here, tied in a little bit to the Nike EYBL circuit. We'll talk some about Houston basketball recruiting and kind of the latest on some guys and their performances. I want to stress that it was the Nike EYBL Session 3 held in Kansas City over the weekend. It was a Friday evening, but then definitely Saturday, Sunday, and through the day Monday type of event over the long weekend for Nike EYBL teams. I do think the EYCL, which is like the next level down within Nike, was there as well, and they had the 15U, the 16U elsewhere. But Kansas City is where to be for watching the top tier rising seniors in, I guess mostly rising seniors. I'll talk about that in a second as well. In Kansas City, these are Nike teams though, so like Mason McGee and Cameron Williams are two guys that are really high on Houston's radar. They're playing with Compton Magic. That's an Adidas team. Caleb Holt is Game Time Elite. That's an Adidas team. This was just the Nike teams over the weekend. So Christian Gibson, Houston Hoops point guard from Maid Creek. He's averaging over 22 points per game. Had a tremendous weekend as well. He had a couple games with backcourt teammate 2027 guard Reese Alston, who plays the Houston Hoops. He's actually on their 16U team, but played up for 3 games. He goes to Second Baptist. Reese Alston, son of Ray for Alston. He played up with the 17Us for 3 games of the weekend, averaged over 10.5 points per game in each outing. Really like the dynamic those two guys had together. They're both like good size, and neither one's like 6'7" or anything like that, but neither one's like 6'1" or anything like that, right? I think I would guess it's like 6'3" and 6'4" just by watching the video. Both pretty impressive athletes. Christian Gibson's a little more on the aggressive side. Reese Alston's more of the paced side, and I mean that in the best way possible. Like plays at his own pace, kind of thing. You saw some great stuff out of Cam Lomax and Bryson Howard, the 2026 Pro Skills group. Those are both DFW kids playing with the Nike Pro Skills. Cam Lomax plays out of one of the Friscos, and then Bryson Howard's out of the other. I think Bryson Howard's at Frisco Heritage. Bryson Howard averaged over 20 points per game this weekend. The 6'8" forwards really, really continuing to impress. Bryson Howard, son of Josh Howard, former NBA player with Dallas Mavericks. Cam Lomax continues to be one of the most impressive small guards, I put that in air quotes, in the class to me. Cam Lomax is really, really paced, really, really controlled. He's small, I guess, only in his height. He plays really, really explosively and under control. Doesn't get pushed off his spots a whole lot. Thought he was impressive. Another guard that was impressive over the weekend for Houston and Washington was Junior County. Now, the Utah prospects, I don't believe, won a game over the weekend. But that's not because anything Junior was doing wrong. Junior County plays in the Utah prospects and plays at Wasatch Academy, which is the exact same pairing that Houston's Isaiah Harwell played for. If you watch Isaiah Harwell's tape at Wasatch Academy or with Utah prospects, it's kind of hard to not see Junior County playing up in AAU last year or playing with them at Wasatch last year. This EYBL season, he's averaging 13.5 points and 5.8 rebounds. Junior County is like facing a lot of defensive pressure. I trust that 13.5 points is like being the focal point of the offense in a lot of ways. His whole backcourt teammate, Akena Ozoe, has a handful of offers, including Houston. I don't think he's been tied as much to the University of Houston, but don't quote me on that. I certainly see Junior's name tied to Houston a lot more. But Akena is more of honestly, like a pass-first, defensive-minded kind of guy, where Junior County can flat score. And I think that's why it shows up more on the EYBL stuff, is because AU asks a lot more about how can you score. On that note, 2026 forward Christian Collins plays for Team Why Not out of Southern California. He goes to St. John's Bosco, if you know Southern California schools. He's averaging 13.5 points, over 8 rebounds, had a handful of double-doubles this weekend. Really, really impressive physicality out of Christian Collins. He's listed as the 6'4", or sorry, the 6'8" forward. I missed my words there. 6'8" forward. I'd bet he could play some bigger minutes than that too if he's not done growing. He's an impressive big guy. Anthony Felice, he's an impressive big guy. He's a 6'5", 6'6" wing. Utah Prep High School, plays for Las Vegas Elite, the Vegas Elite Basketball Club, VEBC. He's averaging 14 and 4. Pretty solid. Again, I don't think that Vegas Elite won a whole lot of games over the weekend in Kansas City, but that's certainly not because of anything Anthony Felice was doing. I think the riser of the spring continues to be Tyshawn Duncan, and he is like the most classic Kelvin Sampson guy. Tyshawn Duncan, 6'8", 7'2" wingspan, if I were guessing. He's, 7.5 points, over 5 rebounds, plays for a JL3, the John Lucas III group, but he's from Alexandria, Louisiana. So he plays for AAU club based in Houston. He lives from Louisiana. And that dude freaking rocks. He is so much energy all the time, like crazy high motor. And he's a constant riser. It feels like he's adding a star every day as far as recruit ranking goes. But man, Houston was on him early, and he's 6'8", 7'2" wingspan. It just feels like a Coug. So we'll see how things go with that. I will say that Houston's got a lot of polished big men they're looking at, and the Adidas circuits and other things like that. And it doesn't mean to say they won't stick with Tyshawn Duncan if he wants to come, but there's going to be a lot of options at those big positions in the class 2026. And so, again, these are just the Nike guys. Mason McGee, Cam Williams both play with Compton Magic. That's his three-stripe circuit team, right? Caleb Holt, Game Time Elite, or I think it's Game Time Elite. Anyway, it's an Adidas club in the Southeast, right? And it's not all about the Nike teams, right? Yes, on last year's group, Bryce Jackson played with Houston Hoops. That's one of the better Nike groups in the greater Houston area. Them and JL3, obviously. But of last year's recruits, you had Chris Sinak played for a Puma club and Young Gifted Clinic, YGC. Kingston Fleming played for San Antonio Futures. That's also a Puma club. Isaiah Harwell played for the Utah Prospects, but a year ago that was an Adidas group. Like, this is not to say that Nike's NLBL. Yes, Mercy Miller was an EYBL guy, but Chase McCarty played in the Under Armour circuit, right? Like, these AU things, while everyone is playing in one of them, I don't think Houston's looking at any of the guys that are not looking at them, right? Irfan Dion is playing in the Adidas group. That doesn't mean Houston's not really interested in the 7-footer, right? It's hard to find and pinpoint where those guys are, but the Nike EYBL had a big weekend. Some of those guys that Houston's looking at were very much showcased. If you want to check out the Nike EYBL, you can watch games and highlights also all over YouTube these days. That was session 3 over the weekend in Kansas City. Session 4 for the Nike EYBL, which is their last ramp up before Peach Jam at the end of the summer, which is like their functional championship bracket play. Session 4 will be in South Carolina. I believe it's July 10th through 13th. And so that'll be the next big Nike EYBL push. Between now and then, you do have an Adidas circuit event. You do have an Under Armour event. You'll also have smaller events like there's one in DFW called the Circuit, right? And those kind of like things where people get to stay fresh and keep from getting rusty and those kind of things. So more on that over the course of the summer as things go on. More on all kinds of recruiting 2026 things as they pop up. We'll be here with it each and every day. We also got football stuff to preview as they get into the summertime for workouts. Whenever the latest Milos Uzan news drops, we'll be here with it as soon as possible at Locked On Coogs. Subscribe and hit the bell so you know we're live. Going to be in the club each and every day. Now, we will say for a second lesson today, I'm recommending Locked On College Basketball. See what Andy and Isaac are doing over there. Locked On Coogs, remember the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Coogs.